All right, let's see, do we have sound?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
A little loud. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
How's everybody today?
Very well, thank you.
Wow.
Just trying to get this set up a little bit easier. I tried to get on my laptop, but it wouldn't let me. Okay. So welcome everybody. Thank you for taking some time off from your Easter Sunday or early Monday where Matt's at. So we can have a little bit of a chat here. We're here today with M.A. Baton, Matt, and P.L. Ribbon. And we're going to be talking to Matt about some good stuff. So this is part of the Pass-the-Baton interviews. We're on Instagram. We're part of a writing community kind of brought together by the word improv. And what the word improv is it's a writing challenge where writers write short stories using new words, words that aren't generally used in everyday language. And there's not really a minimum of characters. There's not really any kind of set rules, or can be a story, a poem, skit, whatnot. And so the purpose of this interview is to get the word improv challenge writers kind of to get the writing community familiar with their work and what they do, and get our names out there, and so that way we can get a little bit more familiar with everybody. So today, Matt, let's see, your bio. I'll go ahead and read that. This is what Matt submitted. In 1730, the enigmatic Mr. Chicken was the last private resident of the now famous number 10 Downing Street, London, before graciously moving next door to accommodate the nation's line of prime ministers who would take residence there for the next 300 years. Nothing more is known about Mr. Chicken until today, when he's now a writer, screenwriter, director, and filmmaker who sometimes goes by the name M.A. Baton. After winning over 150 creative awards during a 25-year career in advertising, he decided to start telling stories that didn't involve brands or their ridiculous reasons to buy. He's now collecting awards for his screenplays and films, including Best Screenplay at TMFF USA, 2 first places at NYC Midnight USA, finalist at Page International Awards UK, semi-finalist at 39th Elche, is that Elche or Elk? Elche in Spain, and a list of official selections. His first short film, Hunt, starred Byron J. Brockman of the X-Men and Unbreakable. His second short film, Missing, starred Lorraine Dix from Black Mirror and Bodyguard. And his award-winning feature film screenplay, Capture, was written for Rupert Grint of the Harry Potter series. His first fantasy novel, Dark and the Boy in the Hole, is completed and currently seeking representation. Hint, hint. Meanwhile, he's concurrently editing his offbeat Star Wars fan film, producing his next short film, in production of his upcoming podcast for screenwriters and actors, and developing a TV show. His daughter either enjoys what he writes or is a convincing little liar. Aren't they all, though? So that is quite the repertoire, sir.
Thank you very much.
You are a busy man. So if you would like to go ahead and read your word improv that you submitted for today.
Now, I can't remember which one we said we were going to do.
You submitted, I don't know which number it was, but it starts with Lord Illingworth's Bacchanalian Feast.
And that will be... That could be Rules and Rumors, could be the more recent one.
Okay.
They're all connected. The last 9 that I've done are all connected. So I'll make this one, yeah. So this one was using the words banal, frippery, vex, exegesis, chthonic, and apotropaic. So Lord Illingworth's annual Bacchanalian feasts were the ultimate show of his loathing for the banal. Surrounded by his guests who had come from far and wide to indulge in all manner of frippery and excess at his sprawling estate, he boasted to the assembled throng about the upcoming sport he had planned for them. With a flourish, he unrolled a paper scroll bearing his own devious rules to maximise the thrill of the chase. We shall ride into the chthonic depths of the forest and emerge victorious with the spoils of the hunt, his voice slurred as he continued to make an exegesis of the scroll's text. His guests laughed and cheered, swept up in the enthusiasm, except Mrs. Arbuthnot, who had already heard Illingworth's hunts included apotropaic rituals performed in the woods, and now his words did further vex her, due to her son Gerald's relationship with the man, both professional and personal. As his voice boomed on and the boast grew more extravagant, Mrs. Arbuthnot became convinced his guests and her son were venturing into the unknown with a man whose appetites were as insatiable as they were dangerous.
Very, very interesting. So all of yours, you said they're all combined. They're part of a kind of a short story series that you're using in a way to create a backstory for a film that you have planned?
Yes, so I've got a short film that I've written that I'm now trying to get together, the timing and the schedule for the production. And it's this strange juxtaposition between somebody trapped in a basement and this bacchanalian feast going on upstairs. And the mystery thriller part is to understand the connection between the two. And given the nature of a lot of the word sleuth words, the word improv words being rather outdated, it lends itself to, some kind of Victorian style language. And so I started using them for just creating a little bit of backstory for some of the characters in the short film, which are all based on the play Woman of No Importance. So it's all the characters pulled from that, from the 19th century play, and using them in a more modern take, but also using this unusual language for the word improv. Yeah, so it's telling the backstories of Lord Illingworth and his ridiculous parties that he holds, where there's an unusual hunt that's about to happen. And then the short film is the hunt.
All right. And on your Instagram, you've got a lot of images with these stories. Do you create those images on your own, or?
I'm using AI for those imagery.
Okay.
And, I have seen there's a lot of writers doing that now.
Yes.
Yeah. Once you work your way through how to provide the right prompts for AI, it's actually really interesting to help visualize some of the characters and some of the locations. And I've done that for the debut manuscript that I've written as well. It helps. And I did that after I'd written the manuscript, and for the second book that I'm actually just starting writing, I'm actually doing it beforehand, because it does really help cement some of these characters and create a vision. And if anything, it makes you feel more excited about writing.
Right. You get that vision in your head of these characters and kind of make them more real and make you want to know what happens with them. So, so you and I talked a little bit a little over a week ago, and you're putting together a pretty good story that I know I want to read, something that my kids would absolutely love to read. But you didn't start out as a novelist.
No.
You had a pretty expansive career with
in advertising, yeah.
In advertising, yes.
Yeah.
And so what made you decide to kind of go to the novel route instead of the advertising route?
So in advertising, I went up through the design ranks, so more as the visual artist style. I mean, my university degree was in visual arts. I'm a painter and drawer. Found myself in this advertising career. It's not like I sought an advertising career. Just I was seeking some kind of creative careers, design careers. And yeah, on my first job, they handed me a scamp for an ad and said, "Here, design this on the Mac." And so I thought, oh, I'm in advertising. So that's what I'm doing with my design skills. I went up through the ranks in design, and when it came time to switch to the sideline, or the center of advertising, I should say, which is being a creative, the person coming up with the ideas for the ads. I really wanted to be a copywriter, but because I'd come up through the design ranks, they said, "We're going to make you an art director," and so I was following still in the art side of things, working with copywriters. Again, went up through that as a creative to be creative director and executive creative director at some big name agencies here and in London. And then in London, took a break from the job, and during that, probably slightly less than a year hiatus, I decided that was the time to dive into my passion for writing. And I had, over the years, written down so many notes for ideas. I had actually semi-started the novel. I had semi-started another one that I probably actually even had the idea for when I was like 13 years old, and started pulling out all these old notes that I had in my files, little notes that I'd made on my phone, and started, looking at those, see what I could flesh out. And some of them didn't lend themselves well to prose, they lended themselves well to short films. And obviously, being in advertising, you've made ads and so forth, which are kind of short films. I kind of thought I would dive into those and turn them into short films, write some short films, taught myself how to write screenplays for film, because it's very different from writing a script for an ad. And then went and produced one. And it won a few awards. It got noticed in a couple of places. Then I started entering some of my screenplays into screenplay contests and won a few awards for some of those. And that's when I thought, okay, I think I can do this. I think I am capable of writing and having people enjoy what I'm writing. The ideas are there. It's obviously how do you translate it to the written language so that it's professional but also entertaining. And that's when I decided to get stuck back into doing the novel. So I pulled out those notes, had a look at what I'd written down in terms of notes, and went, right, let's pick one and make that the story. And so I picked out Dark, the story of this boy.
Okay. And so with your writing process, with that, are you kind of a pantser, you kind of a plotter? You already had notes, but did you kind of have an idea of where the story was going to begin with, or you just kind of started writing and saw where it went?
So for short stories, it's just have a note and then start writing and make it up as you go along, flesh it out, screw it up, throw it away, start again. For my novel, I did start prior to this hiatus. I did start just writing, and that's why I didn't get very far.
Okay.
Because I wasn't thinking through the longer story. So when I decided to have another go at it is when I decided to really actually plan, to go through the strategy of it all, to make the full notes for every single chapter, to work out the narrative arc, to work out who the characters are, to write their own little kind of character backstories as well. So I knew their bios, so I understood who they were. And then I actually sat down with essentially a set of cards to go through and work out what's again, almost working at a 3-act structure. What are the 3 acts? What's the inciting incident? What are the obstacles? Where are the points that it has to have an ultimate climax? And then where do you get those mini climaxes? And that allowed me to kind of go, right, so now I know how the story's going to pan out. I've thrown in all these ideas. We've got the nice twists in there. That's when I started writing it. But even then, as I was writing it, you find yourself writing yourself into kind of corners where you're going, hang on, that's not going to make sense in the long run, despite the fact I planned this. It's not going to make sense in the long run. So I ended up my wife actually sent me on my own little writer's retreat weekend away, which was very nice, to this little cabin in the middle of nowhere. And I went in there and pulled the pictures off the wall and stuck post-it notes all over the wall where I'd written down, again, everything I'd written so far, and just looked at it. I was able to move the post-it notes around. So basically I was changing around chapters, but also changing around some of the incidents within the story. And that is when it really fell into place. And it was only a matter of 2-3 weeks after that I'd smashed through the whole thing and rewritten the whole thing, and it worked really well for me.
Oh, wow. Well, that's so exciting. That's probably what I need to get away from my children.
It's something I'd recommend to everyone. I'd recommend it to everyone. It's as much as even now during this call, they're upstairs in the bedrooms and so forth, but just knowing that there's other people in the immediate vicinity does tend to also create blockades in your thoughts, because you're
Right.
concerned about the concern of an interruption happening. But once you've got complete autonomy over your entire space and time, you can really just roll your sleeves up and get stuck into what you need to get stuck into.
Right. And so this novel, Dark, you had mentioned that it was kind of a COVID book. So you took that time too, everybody was on lockdown.
Yes. Yeah.
Wasn't anything else to do?
Yeah, it was. So the book itself really was during lockdown. You've got all the time and nowhere to go. So yeah, that was one of the main time drivers for being able to do it. But like I said, then getting out of lockdown and having that weekend away to really sort things out, just made it all come together.
So a little bit about, I know you said when we talked that you didn't mind talking about what Dark was about. Give us some input on it.
So it's aimed at middle grade. And it's I know it's the cliche to drag it out as a comp title, but you remember the Harry Potter series when it first came out, it really nailed that 10 to 14, 15-year-old. But what was amazing, obviously what JK managed to do, was get adults who hadn't picked up a book in decades, picking up that book and reading it to find out what's going on. And if anything, they were reawakening their inner child and getting stuck back into fantasy again. What's interesting about it, though, is it's all very nice, despite the fact there are some, there's a bad guy, Voldemort, and so forth, and there are some deaths and so forth throughout. It's still very nice. Certainly, in the primary characters, very nice. I've always been a big fan of fantasy sci-fi. As a nerdy teen growing up playing Dungeons and Dragons and so forth, heavily into mythology and the history of things, certainly medieval history. I wanted to write a story that focuses on that same audience, but make it darker. So my character is actually an anti-hero. The boy in my novel, the central character, is a child with no name, who has spent his entire life trapped in a pit in the basement of the king's castle. And when he is accidentally let loose in an exciting incident, he escapes the castle and ends up discovering the last few remaining monsters of myth and legend, who have been hunted to the brink of extinction by mankind. And when he meets with them and they take him in, they discover he has the ability to mimic anything he sees, including their fantastical abilities. And he mounts an uprising against the greatest evil of all, humankind. So he's leading the monsters of the night in a war against humanity. So it's flipping around who is the good guy and who is the bad guy. And if we're all honest with ourselves and everything you see on the news today, humanity is probably the biggest bad guy there is. So I've got this little boy taking on humanity, taking on all those things that we do that are wrong. The wars, the greed, the capitalism, the whole works. Just all of it's bad, so let's take it on.
And I think that's something that a lot of people are interested in. So. Yeah,
and peppering it with, obviously, basically within this fantasy world, peppering it with inspirations from the real world of history and so forth. So borrowing from our genuine history, you're able to create a bit of a parallel that people can relate to. I call it almost a visual shorthand. It's people can latch on to an idea easier if it relates to something they know of from their own environment. So if you know of the story of the Trojan horse, you can create a version of that and people can latch onto it because they understand what's going on. You don't need to then dwell upon the Trojan horse and all the backstory of it because people know. They know what's going to happen. So you can utilize that in your own story in some way. So borrowing from real history allows those things to happen, those moments to happen, but also by wrapping it up in, again, the evils of humanity. It's almost treating it like it's a wake-up call. I don't want to be some kind of sage person trying to educate people, but it's almost a wake-up call of this stuff is real, and why do we allow it to happen? Why aren't we standing up? Even if we have to stand up with the people we've feared in the past, the creatures of the night, why don't we stand up against this stuff that's going on around us every day?
Right, right. And I think that's hard for a lot of people to do. But it is something that is very intriguing that everyone should think about. So I know you said that you're doing querying right now.
Yes.
You don't want to self-publish. You stand behind your work. You want to get it out there traditionally published and pick up an agent. And so
yes, and I've spoken to a couple of people who have self-published. One who self-published fiction, 3, 4 who have self-published, actually 2 self-published fiction, 3 or 4 who have self-published non-fiction. And they all say the same thing, that it's great to actually see your book in print. And for one of them, who's actually done reasonably okay in their online sales, it's great to see that little bit of cash coming in, but there's a lot of effort required in marketing it yourself. There's so much required in that if you aren't doing it almost as a full-time job, your book's not really going to get out there. So there's that side of things. As much as I am, my career has been in advertising and marketing, I should be able to do that steady in my head, but I don't want to have to worry about that. I don't want to have to worry about how I really, really push this. So I know you still have to do that even in traditional publishing these days.
right.
But it's nice to have the support network, but also it's nice to know that there is organizations, as much as that sector itself is still kind of stuck in slightly archaic models, without trying to piss off anybody out there. It'd be nice if they progress slightly. As much as they're stuck in those models, they have the connections. They have obviously the distribution network. It is all pretty much locked down, and it'd be nice to know that if you've got a deal, if your book is being published, it's going to appear in bookstores. Right. Not you having to walk up to the bookstores and knock on the door and say, "Can you please stock my book?"
Right, right. And something else.
Sorry, and the second part to that. The second part to that is, is having an agent also has connections to the bigger picture as well in terms of the industry. Even when I've written the book Dark, I've written it even with the screenplay in mind. How do you make it translatable to other mediums, other media? Right. So as much as we want to see our books out there on the shelves, and the ultimate dream is to be out in the public and seeing somebody sitting down reading your book. There was a famous story, I think it was Jeffrey Archer, who was on a plane somewhere from the States back to the UK, and the gentleman next to him was reading a Jeffrey Archer book. And Jeffrey Archer asked him, he said, "Oh, you're reading that? What do you think?" He went, "Oh, it's all right. It's not as good as his others." Saying that to the actual author himself. It'd be nice to actually see that out there, but then there's where else can it go? And to have somebody see it, the potential for it to be serialized as a TV show or be a feature film, all that sort of stuff obviously adds to the power of your story, but also adds to your own success. And that's the other reason why I'd also like there to be an agent and publishers behind it, because they have that network as well. Right. I mean, I've even written Dark, so it can even be merchandised, and the second one even further so. So, how do you factor all that sort of stuff in? Because at the end of the day, the publishing world is a money-making world, right? It's a world that needs to make money. So if they can see the potential of where it could go and the potential money that it could make, then at least that's a better start
Right. And this is the first in a series. You've
Yeah,
got several books in mind.
yeah. I've got at least 3, but possibly 5 planned for it. The second one is already underway, without the first being printed yet or picked up. So already planning the second one and going through and like doing that entire narrative arc structure. I know the bigger picture story of where it's going to go. In a vague thread, I know what the ultimate goal is, who the ultimate bad guy is, and so forth, and the ultimate climax. And just now, it's how do you have all those other obstacles coming in? Also broadening the world itself. It's not just telling a story. I'm inventing a world, a place in which there are certain rules that are applied. One of the main rules is the boy himself, the mystery behind him, and how does he know how to do this? How does he have this ability? And obviously padding out the idea of there are others out there. Who are these others? Where do they come from? And what is their role and purpose? And then weaving that back into the central narrative.
Right. And so does the first one end on a pretty big cliffhanger, or does it just kind of,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, writing it so that it could be, well, certainly writing it so that you want it to be a page turner. You want somebody to get to the end of a chapter and not be able to put it down. You want a chapter turner rather than a page turner, but also writing it so it could be serialized or it could be a film. Every chapter has to serve a purpose. Every chapter has to reveal part of the puzzle of the bigger story, but also every chapter has to have some kind of inciting incident. And some of those, and if you get the pacing right, not so much like clockwork, you get the pacing right, you can have 2 out of 3 or every second one being a cliffhanger at the end of the chapter, so that people have to keep on going. They can't put it down. If you try and make it at the end of every chapter, it starts to feel a little bit serialized, like a TV drama. Also, it starts to become a little too predictable for the reader, that there's going to be this high and low. It's this almost like a sine wave. You want it to be a little bit more random. So, like I said, making sure there's an inciting incident, and sometimes those inciting incidents are cliffhangers.
Right.
But then, the whole story itself also has to do that. So make sure that you are ending on a big, exciting climax, but then post-climax, as you've got the summation of things, also allow there to be, and I've allowed there to be, I think I've got two new mysteries, 2 questions that are unanswered, if any. That's probably the best way to say it. After the end of the big climax, there's 2 questions that have popped up that are unanswered, and that's what leads into the beginning of the second book.
Okay. All right. Something that I found interesting, especially with your bio about your daughter either enjoying what you write or being a convincing little writer, what you had mentioned to me when we talked was that she cries at all the right points.
Yeah.
So
while I was writing it, I was getting ahead of what I was reading to her. I wasn't writing a chapter and then rushing up to read it to her. I was getting ahead, but I'd read chapters to her for bedtime story each night, and got to the point where I actually had caught up to what I was writing, had to have a break, did that weekend away, rewrote the story, and then came back and started reading to her again from chapter 1. So we did go through it probably 1 or 2 chapters each night. So over the course of 3-4 weeks, we managed to get through it all. And what was surprising, but also very self-actualizing, very fulfilling, was that there was 2 chapters that she cried at the end. And that's when I knew that she had emotionally invested in the characters. And she's slightly younger than the key audience, only like 1 or 2 years younger. But the fact that she was in tears, particularly at one particular point, she was in tears and saying, "Daddy, why'd you do that? Why'd you do that?" She was desperate for that character to have not suffered what they suffered. And so, that meant that I knew I had devoted enough time to character building within this world that the main characters, people can invest in them, so that when something happens, you feel it, certainly is in your audience. So that was very fulfilling. Yes, it was very fulfilling to have my daughter cry. That sounds like bad parenting there, but yeah, you know, it all works out in the end. It does mean that she's going, what happens next? What happens next? And, you know, further on in the story, there's another thing that's revealed and another thing that's revealed. And, you know, they get over the incident and are excited for what's happening next in the story.
Good, good. So you have on your website, you've got a couple other stories on there.
Yeah.
Besides Dark.
Yeah. So the second series that I've started fleshing out the notes for is probably young adult, so going up a bit in terms of demographic, and it's more in the science fiction rather than fantasy genre. A little bit of a hybrid genre. It's called Five Factions, and it's the idea of 5 secret societies that are at war with each other, and they pluck out the best from society, so the people. And it is so based on your schoolwork, right? You have to decide, are you going to, you know, or not decide, but you end up showing that you are really good at mathematics, or you're really good at sport, or you're really good at these other things, various disciplines. And it's plucking those disciplines and saying, yeah, those who have become the best at those disciplines get recruited to these secret societies. And so you actually do have techies up against jocks, up against, I'm trying to remember what the others are now, who the 5 factions are. So you got the techies, who are your geeks and your whiz kids. You got the jocks, who are your sports fans. You have the chems, those who are very good at chemistry, and then you've also got I started with them being kind of the magics, but it didn't make sense in the world, so I've made them more about psychogenics, people who understand human behavior and how to manipulate human behavior.
Okay.
So it's almost like today's science around heuristics that in the old days you would have called it magic, or at least occultism, of how did they make people do that and how did they make people believe that. And it's the psychogenics, and these are the 4 main factions, and they discover there's a 5th faction.
Okay. And do you have any kind of timeline for those, or those are you're gonna?
Look, if I had a timeline for all of my projects, I'd probably start to freak out. You said at the start in the list of things I'm doing that I'm a busy person. I'm busy, but if anything, it's more to do with I'm distracted. So much going on. You're going to go, oh, this is a great idea. This is a great idea. Even just in the last week, I've been writing down all the notes and collating all the notes that I've had for short stories, and some of them were thought starters for potentially a feature film or a novel. And you look at it going, nah, that'll be a short story. It'd be better off as a short story. And now I'm thinking, oh, I could put together a quick compendium of short stories and have that out there and in social media. So it's more that I get distracted, and it's what's the next thing in pursuit of something taking off. And the reality is, look, if I got representation for Dark, that'd be the focus. All other things we put aside, and that would be the focus. I'm thinking between writing the second book for Dark or the first book of 5th Faction, I'll probably lean towards the first book of 5th Faction. So I have 2 options out there on the table to shop around, rather than 2 books of a series that people might not want.
Okay. Well, that sounds interesting. So is there anything else that I think we've kind of covered a lot? Is there anything else you want to share with us or put out there?
Look, this opportunity here today, this starts obviously with the word improvs from Word Sleuth. And the word improvs, I'm not even sure how I came across them. What's cool about the word improvs is it challenges your brain to, in a reasonably rapid fire turnaround, because Word Sleuth doesn't want to, wait 3 months for you to respond to a Word Sleuth,
Right.
word improv. It challenges your brain to structure sentences using unusual words, And as writers, we don't just want to structure sentences. We need there to be some kind of narrative that holds those sentences together. And I find that challenge fascinating in a psychological sense, right? As writers, we want to be able to sit down and have our own ideas and free flow and that sort of stuff. But the challenge kind of throws that up. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, just throws those pieces out and says, quickly solve this. Oh, and by the way, throw an idea in. Those things that are your stock in trade, those things that take ages to come up with and cement, we want you to do that really quickly. So I do find the process quite invigorating. It's fun. So again, if anybody out there is watching and hasn't done it, have a crack. It is fun. It is challenging. You don't have to post it if you don't like what you've written. That's fine. I think it's an interesting way to explore language and explore rapid fire idea generation, which again, for me, stems back into my career in advertising, which has to be rapid fire idea generation, right? You're given a brief, and sometimes, you used to be able to be given 2 weeks to come up with an idea. These days, sometimes you're given 2 days. 2 days to solve this, and we're going to be back to the client with full stuff to present. So you've probably got 1 day to have an idea, and we've spent a day in design. So it is rapid fire idea generation. And the real problem with that is you don't get to get through the bad stuff, right? It's the shit that comes out first is shit. It's the stuff that comes out later, because you've got to get rid of the stuff that's no good to find the stuff that is fertile territory. So technically, my brain has been kind of trained that way a little bit, but at the same time, it's not fun. It's not fun to do it that way, certainly in an advertising sense. But in terms of the freedom of writing, the freedom of expression, of doing whatever you want to do, where there are no parameters of this is a product we have to sell to this audience, whatever it might be. It's just use these words in a story. There's a bit more freedom, so you can explore things. What I wanted, the first one wasn't part of backstory. The first one I did was, I think, Sherlock Holmes based thing.
Right.
It was after that, the ones after that, that I decided they could apply to the backstory. And so it's almost like I gave myself a new rule on top of the word improv rules, that they have to use the same characters, and it has to be connected to the previous word improvs rather than just be disjoint, just standalone pieces. So turning it almost into, as you said, a series of microfiction is an added layer, because I also then have to know what the narrative arc is going to be in the bigger picture. So it's those challenges keeps your mental acuity going. It's the sort of stuff you can apply to the career of writing. As I'd mentioned to Word Sleuth himself in a separate call, the New York City Midnight, which PL has participated in, it's an amazing challenge as well. So people like these challenges, and I don't want to take anyone away from Word Sleuth. Keep doing your Word Sleuth. But the screenwriting, New York City Midnight screenwriting, it is a very interesting thing, again, for screenwriters. It has to be screenwriting. It's at least with Word Sleuth and the word improv challenges, you can write poetry, you can write prose, you can write a revisionist history if you want. It's anything you want. But the New York City Midnight screenwriting, it has to be a screenplay, and they tell you how long it has to be, how many pages it has to be, and they give you essentially a genre and a character and an object, or an inciting incident or something. I can't remember what the three things are. And you have to write that in a very short turnaround time. But these are the kind of challenges that make you explore new depths, new ways of approaching things. And even if you end up with something that's crap, that you can't enter into provide it back to Word Improv or enter it into Midnight, at least you've explored it. You've got your brain thinking outside of your own bubble. I think as writers, we can easily get caught up in our own thing. And if anything, that's probably why I have so much projects on my plate, because I'm easily distracted and going, oh, this could be an idea, and this could be an idea, and that could be an idea, rather than sitting down and going, let's just get through this one first. And then when this one's done, or I've explored it and found that it's not going to work, then I can start another one. I mean, in that, I've also got 4 children's picture books on my list that I've written, and I could illustrate myself. But again, the time to devote to that, to illustrate them, can be challenging, right? So the there's so many different ways to fulfill your needs as a writer. Just, if anything, I need to learn my own lesson, which is to find one and focus on it, get through it before you go to the next one. Stop trying to add more and more to your plate, because it's a long list that, if anything, becomes overwhelming, and you're going to go, I don't know what to do.
Right. I know I've got a few people I know that have a lot of things like that going on, and trying to figure out which one you want to focus on to just get through and get done, and then move on to the next one can be difficult. So,
look, if we didn't have bills to pay and we were able to just sit around our own little cave all day, surrounded by the things we need to inspire us, that'd be a lot easier. But you know, we've got lives, families, bills to pay, all that sort of stuff. So I think you'd need to be a little more judicious. I need to be a bit more judicious in what project I'm actually focusing on.
Right. Well,
How do you do that? How do you find the way to focus?
I actually jump around all the time. I have one that is done that I've been going through. My goal is to have it out by summertime, and I'm going to do the self-publishing route. But I have a dozen other projects in some set of not completion. And for a while I would get up in the morning, I would be doing whatever it was that I was doing that day, and then something would pop through my head, and I'd be, oh, that works with this, and I would jump around from project to project to project, depending on how I was feeling and what was going through my head that day. And and I knew I was never going to finish anything by doing that. But
I think one of the problems for me is I like it when a project's finished,
right, and
so it's kind of hard to get one started, because the finishing is the exciting part. That to write the end at the end of something is very, very fulfilling. As long as what you've written is good. I mean, you don't want to bash out just complete crap and write at the end and go, yay. The finishing is really the fun part. Starting is daunting. It's so daunting. And there's endless quotes from the famous writers of past who talk about, the blank page is your greatest enemy and all that sort of stuff. And it's true, right? Sitting down and facing a blank page is bad. It's bad when you write down the first couple of sentences or first paragraphs and look at it and go, what the hell is that? Where am I going with this? Right? I jumped straight to the ending. Where's all the exciting stuff before that? That's just it. So starting is hard. Once you've got something going and it seems to be working, I find it is certainly easier. But that not race to the finish, but getting to that finish line, that's very fulfilling. It'd be nice if we were somehow able to bottle that and remind ourselves, get to the finish of this, get to the finish of it. What about you, PL? How do you focus?
I actually am a finisher. I start something, I finish it, but typically I will overlap it a little bit. So I never lose momentum, but I'll edit something and I'll have something new running simultaneously.
All right. So we need some workshops from you then. That's what we need.
Yes, yeah. I get up really early, so I have a lot of time on my hands.
That is something we've discovered in the setup of this. For those who don't know, PL gets up about 3 a.m. every day, which is mental. Mental. Doesn't mean she's going to bed at 4 p.m. 4 in the afternoon or something.
It should mean that. It does not mean that. But I don't know. I'm one of those people that the more I have on my plate, the better I am. I work under deadlines really, really well. I'm actually getting 2 manuscripts. I actually sent one just a minute ago to one editor, and I have another manuscript that is due in 4 days. I have to rewrite another 30,000 words before that. But, that's been my focus. I find, I feel like when you focus on one thing that you see, like you're talking about, you have that momentum from the last success that pushes you to the next success.
So even just then, when you're talking about what's happening, what's on your plate right now, the minute you started talking about those deadlines, your energy shifted, right? Did you notice that, Symphony?
I did.
Her energy shifted, right? it's again, because there's a finish line, right? It's not just finish line, but you've got a project happening, you've got interest in a project, and it has to get done. And that's what we want. That's what we all want. We want a project that gets picked up, and when it gets picked up, then it's got to be done. It's got to be right. And you could give me a deadline tomorrow of my novel having a rewrite. I'll do it. I'll stay up for 24 hours. I'll do it. But it's having that I don't know, that validation from the third parties of this is something we want to pursue that makes you pursue it even harder.
But for me, I feel like it's got to be intrinsic. It has to come from me. Like I have to have that success myself. Like if I wait for somebody else to give me feedback, then I lose momentum. So I'm sure you felt that, like, you know, doing the midnight. I mean, you get in there and they give you 48 hours, you get it done, and like it feels good. You don't even care where you place, like placing first, whatever, it doesn't even matter, because by the time they told you that, you've already started something else. And I feel like, that's definitely how I work, and it sounds like that's kind of how you work too. And once you really start propelling yourself forward, then that momentum just builds, and for me, it's just like level up, level up, level up. And that's how you get where you are. Like you've had so many different careers and so many projects running, something's going to take off.
Yeah.
It's a waiting game at that point.
Yeah. We've got a question here that's come through in the chat from the real Corey Rowe. Hi, Corey Rowe. The question is, what do you do if you aren't good at keeping deadlines? LOL. Look, the reality is no one's good at keeping a deadline, right? Everyone will do the bulk of their work at the 11th hour, right? I think it's true. I mean, even PL has kind of intimated that she might get up at 2 or 3 a.m., but when there's a deadline looming, she has 30,000 words to write. Why have you got 30,000 words to write when there's a deadline? Because it's the 11th hour. We will always save the last real push to the very end. I guess that's why it's called the last push, right? Don't worry about trying to keep deadlines until you actually have a genuine deadline. If you give yourself a deadline, you're never going to keep it. But if you've got a third party, a serious third party who's interested in your work, that's going to take your career to the next level, that's a serious deadline, you'll keep it, right? If anything, it's trying to understand why aren't you good at keeping those deadlines. Are you easily distracted by your environment or your family or whatever it is? Then you remove that. Don't kill your family. Just remove yourself from the situation. Remove yourself from the place.
Get up earlier. Get up while they're sleeping. Look, PL's on something. If you can do the physical discipline of getting up at 2 or 3 a.m. every day, and not having any kind of afternoon life, then that's what you do. But yeah, find ways to work around that overcomes why you're not very good at keeping deadlines. I hope that answers it. Let's go back a little bit through the chat, because we probably should be paying attention more to this. Madam Overy, love this.
That came through.
Pardon?
I said I think that was the only question that came through. I was kind of watching it a little bit.
Yeah, Madam Overy, I love stories of reawakening a child.
I would throw out the accountability.
Yeah.
If you can be accountable to yourself and to other people, especially like find a close-knit group of somebody that's going to kick you in the butt when you don't have your words. I have a friend out there, you know who you are, who has given me 3,000 words a day to write to beat this person. And that does not count the editing portion. So I have been mostly successful there, but find somebody who is there for you in ways that maybe somebody who isn't a writer can't understand. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Look, I guess part of me reading my manuscript to my daughter was that kind of third party validation, even if it's coming from a child. But it was creating mini deadlines. It was creating the need to write the next part to fulfill the story, because I didn't want to leave her hanging. I didn't want to go, oh, sorry, darling, I bailed out at chapter 12 and you can make up the rest of your own. No, I needed to finish that. So Real Corey Rowe said, I'm a screenwriter with ADHD and autism. Look, welcome to the club. Look, I have very mild ASD, which partly is ADHD. It's the nature of being creative. I haven't fully, part of what I also do in my job is, I'm struggling to finish the sentences now that I raised that. Part of what I do on my job is also I'm fascinated by the science of creativity. What makes the brain think creatively? And if you want, DM me and I can send you some links to the articles that I have written about this. There's one that goes quite in depth into the science of creative thinking, but also unlocks or uncovers some ways in which you can start creative thinking, or at least open your brain to creative thinking and get to those ideas faster. In part of me doing that kind of research, I have also looking at my own, semi-neurodiverse state. I use the word semi because I don't want to latch onto it. I've wondered if there's a connection between things like ASD and ADHD with creative thinking, creative expressionists. I'm pretty sure there is. My early thinking has shown that there can be a higher level of ASD and ADHD with creative people, or it might be the other way around. There's a higher level of creativity with ASD and ADHD. Either way, they go hand in hand. Don't let that be the thing that holds you back, right? ADHD, if anything, yes, it means that it's difficult to focus on things, and therefore it can be difficult to hit that deadline. That will be the biggest thing for you to overcome, Corey. The autism doesn't get in the way. If anything, it allows you to explore new ways of expression, new ways of language, the new ways of people interact. And if anything, I mean, Symphony and Peel will be able to probably verify this, is when you're going through and you're looking at what lit agents are looking for, 70% of them are saying they want something that's about neurodiversity, or at least about diversity in some way, right? If you can use the ADHD and the ASD as the central focus of a narrative, you've got something that you are writing about, what you know, you're writing about a truth, and you're probably writing quite emotionally. It's something that could easily get picked up. So if anything, allow that to be part of your expression, explore that. I usually make what I write so there's no third party to help with that. That's great. You're a screenwriter, you're writing your own stuff, you make your own films. That's fantastic. Are you doing it because you want to write, or are you doing it because you want to make films? At some point, you have to then hand over your scripts and have somebody else make them, or have somebody else come to you saying, I've got a script, you want to make this. So maybe that's the other thing you need to look at, Corey, is where is it you want to be? Do you want to be the screenwriter, or do you want to be the director-producer, or the DOP? Very few people can be all of the above. Even Quentin Tarantino did it once and then had to just focus on being the one thing. So what's the one thing you want to be, and allow that to happen? I hope that helps, Corey.
That's awesome.
Great advice. Does anybody else have any other questions? Now would be the time.
The one
and
thing
while you're thinking,
I was going to say, the one thing I would say, you were talking about agents. I feel like what I've talked to a lot of agents, what they want to hear is that you have a standalone with series potential. If you don't know that, write that down. That is exactly the words that they are looking for. A standalone with series potential. What that means is that when you walk away from book one, yeah, it's great. Like you were talking about, have 2 questions that are left unanswered. But if you never write another book, or that person never picks up your book, or it takes too long for your book to show up, that your readers don't feel cheated by you. If they feel cheated, they are out, and you will never, ever get them back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a very good point. One of my favorite authors, and I've got actually the first edition of every single one of his books, Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett's world was absolutely phenomenal. His gift for world building with fascinating characters, but also the comedy that he had through his fantasy genre was exceptional. And there was always some kind of lesson. Like every story he was telling has some kind of lesson. It was always based on something real in the real world. And in fact, there was a point there about 2/3 of the way through his series, you could tell what country he had visited recently, because that became the location of the next story. And it was very easy to see that when he wrote Small Gods, he had been to Egypt and the Middle East. He'd been there and explored it and went, this is the inspiration for the next story. And Last Continent was after his trip to Australia. He came out to Australia for a book signing, and I went there with my books and had him sign it, and I met him, right? And it was, a year and a half later, Last Continent came out, and you're reading that as an Australian, you're going, this is Australian history. I don't mean the modern Australia, I mean the Indigenous Aboriginal history. He had immersed himself in our historical culture and went, this could be a fascinating insight into creating another extension of the world. The fact that Australia was it's a continent, and it was only discovered 200 and something years ago, 230, 40 years ago. Why did it take so long to find this one continent? And he had that. He was able to kind of go, let's use that in the Discworld series. He's created an entire world. He had a map of the entire world and went, why wouldn't they have not discovered another continent? It happened in the real world. Let's use that. He's been a great inspiration to me. His writing ability, his world building, his characters. Mine don't have as much humor. I try to throw in a little bit of a smile every now and then, something that could be construed as a joke or some humor.
You're Neil Gaiman.
It doesn't quite fit.
Yeah?
Pardon?
You're Neil Gaiman, right? You love Neil Gaiman. Like, I feel like you had sent me that you like him. Are you a Neil Gaiman?
Yeah, Neil Gaiman. But I got onto Neil Gaiman from Terry Pratchett.
Oh, that's so funny. I was the other way around. Mine was Good Omens. Was yours the crossover? Was Good Omens, right? Because they wrote it together.
Good Omens. Good Omens.
Good Omens. Yeah. Mine is very much like Pratchett. Super funny. Like, I love that he did that. But it's so funny that we had the same book, but we actually reversed. I was like Neil Gaiman all the way, and I'm like, who's Terry Pratchett? I was very late to the game.
And look, if again, anybody who's interested in fantasy fiction, Terry Pratchett, he will open your mind. Yeah. What was the first one you picked up?
A Pratchett?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, I don't remember. I think it was the very first of that really long series, the one that was like forever long. Do you?
Right. Okay.
I can't think of the name of the book, but I was introduced to him. I'm sorry.
Right. Okay. The first one was Light Fantastic.
Sorry?
The first one was Light Fantastic.
That might have been what it was. I started reading that in the midst of reading Jim Butcher and got lost. Yeah, so are you a Dresden fan?
With Small Gods. Sorry?
Have you read Dresden Files?
No.
Oh my gosh.
Is that a recommendation?
Oh, yes. Dresden Files, but if you like Dresden Files, you've got to read Alex Verus by Benedict Jacka. If you haven't read him, he is a better writer than Butcher, but he has a lot of Butcher in him. And I love Neil Gaiman and I love Butcher. And so those would be my recommendations. But Terry Pratchett is a really great recommendation too. Yeah. I could sit here and talk to you about this forever, but wow, it is like 6:30. So I'm sure people are like trying to go do their Easter, but we should hook up and talk.
And look, I mean, the real core is still here. The rest, Terry Pratchett, he had some neurodiversity as well. He was one of those. Because I met him twice at 2 book signings. On the first one, I had him sign my book and so forth, and I got the obligatory kind of selfie before a selfie was a thing with him. And the person right behind me went to shake his hand, and he went, "Whoa, he doesn't touch hands. He doesn't touch people," right? And I look back on it now and go, that wasn't just a quirk. That was a person who has a neurodiversity in some way, right? They have their own kind of system of way they interact with human beings and so forth. But he went on to become, I think, the most prolific, if not one of the most prolific writers in the fantasy genre. And I love the way the man went out in style. What he did with his Twitter account. Do you remember that, PL?
I don't. No, I'm not familiar with that.
So, for those who don't know, in his books, one of the characters he has is the Grim Reaper, Death itself, and he had a structure in which Death only ever spoke in all caps, and it meant that after Death had been in several books, he was able to use that as a literary device where Death is not even in the scene. There might be a battle going on, and then somebody thinks that they got hit with a sword, and then you'll have somebody speaking in all caps, and you just know Death is here now. Right, he was able to use that as a means that Death has now just entered the scene without me introducing the character at all. I just write that in, and you know that Death is there, which is fantastic whenever he pulled that out. when he knew he was ill, he had obviously set up with the executive of his state or his agent or whatever, that at the time of his passing, his Twitter account would have one last tweet right after he died, and it was in all caps, and it was a message from death.
Oh.
I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of "Nice to meet you finally, Mr. Pratchett," something like that, in all caps.
Yeah.
He didn't even have to say who the character was, just did it in all caps, and hundreds of thousands of followers knew exactly what it meant.
Yeah.
Just the man had style and class. It was absolutely incredible. And no more questions?
Doesn't like
All right.
it.
No.
Well, thank you. That's a lot of fun.
Super awesome.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Yeah, and you'll be the interviewer next time.
I will be.
I believe that the day and time is to be determined. So we want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you, PL, for being back up, and Matt for being here to talk with us. And we want to invite everybody who's here to try out the word improv challenges. And Matt gave us a lot of information about that earlier, so that was really nice. And follow Word Sleuth on Instagram. He's also on Twitter. You can DM him for more information if you want. And Matt can be found here on Instagram at Mr. Chicken Films, and then also your website mabatten.com and mrchickenfilms.com. PL, where can you be found? Just here on Instagram? Or?
Yeah, so my main social media is Instagram. I am at PLRiven, PLRIVEN_author, and you can hit me up on my link tree there. And yeah, that's the best place. And
I'm on Twitter and Instagram, both under symphony_hail, and then I have a website, symphonyhail.com. And so everybody can check us out and follow us everywhere.
My Instagram is Mr. MR dot, so Mr. Chicken _films. I tried to do it without the dots or the underscores, but for some reason it's already taken. It's taken, but by an account that's done nothing.
Oh, no.
It could be one of those things of when I created it as a brand name while I was living in London and created the website. It could be one of those things that somebody's then, I'm going to own the handle of that, and maybe Mr. Chicken will come to me and ask me
to charge you
to buy it. Yeah,
it's coming. It's knocking on that door when you hit that. Get that agent. Watch out.
Yeah, but failing that, I think my website MABATTEN mabatten.com, and that has links through to all the social media and so forth.
Fantastic. Okay, all right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Happy Easter.
I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Easter, and have a lovely Monday, Matt. And we'll see everyone later.
Bye.
Excellent. Bye everyone.